Hello everyone, it's Nina and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be attempting to tier list all of the books that I read in 2022. I'm going to be talking about my favorite books as well as some of my least favorite books that I read. We have 73 books that we're going to be talking about here, so I'm going to not make this intro any longer than it already has to be, and let's get into the video. We have 7 tiers that are basically going to break down my thoughts of the books that I read. Most of these tiers are positive. I try not to be very negative about the books that I read overall, because as you'll see, I am quite picky, but I think that it's mostly a me problem and not necessarily a book problem. Starting from the lowest tier, which is Z. This is basically books that I considered quite boring. I guess you can ask the question of, is it a greater crime for something to be poorly executed or boring? And on most cases, I usually fall into the boring as a greater evil. Because at least if something's poorly executed, there might be something in there for me to find interesting to pick at. But these ones, if they're not like intellectually stimulating at all, I usually consider them to be the lowest of the low. There are 2 books on this list that I want to highlight in my opinion as being the worst books that I read this year. They're the only things I gave less than 2.5 stars, which is definitely a mark of a unliked book for me. And those 2 books were Late to the Party by Kelly Quinlan and Nothing But Black and Teeth by Cassandra Khaw. I dislike these books for very different reasons. For Nothing But Black and Teeth, it was mostly just the writing style I felt was very, very overworked, and it probably was the most pretentious thing I read this year. And for Late to the Party, I just disliked all of the main characters. I felt like the lesson that you were trying to learn from the story was not well articulated at all. And one of the side characters who I did enjoy, I felt like he should have been the main character over the actual story that we got. The other books on this list are In Deeper Waters, The Shadow Between Us, Gallant, Summer Suns, The Grimrose Girls, and Anatomy, a Love Story. And yes, all of these books I just found were pretty bland and uninteresting, at least to me personally. The next lowest tier on the list is It's Not You, It's Me. A lot of these books on this list are very popular, so it is for someone. So I just am not maybe the right reader for this, or I personally just found it very unsatisfying or confusing. Some of these books are in here because even though I found them confusing, I felt like there was things for me to think about and dissect a little bit deeper, which is why they're moved into this tier versus the lower tier. The books on this list are I Wish You All the Best, She Drives Me Crazy, Six of Crows, The Death of Jane Lawrence, It Happened One Summer, Wrath Goddess Sing, Notes on an Execution, Daisy Jones and the Six, What Moves the Dead, Mexican Gothic, Slewfoot, Electra, Daisy Darker, and The Honeys. Looking at this list, there are a couple books on here whose authors I would definitely read from in the future. One of those is Electra by Jennifer Saint. I really liked Ariadne by Jennifer Saint, which is going to be further up on a different tier on this list. So I think it was just particularly this story that didn't resonate with me. So I definitely will be checking out other books by her that she releases in the future. Speaking of other mythology retellings, we also have Wrath Goddess Sing by Maya Dean. I put this book on this list mostly because I found a lot of plot points to be somewhat contradictory or confusing in the actual story structure. I did think her writing style was good, if not a little overly flowery at times, but I think since she also was a debut author, I could see her growing to have other stories that I will like in the future and want to check out. One on this list that I'm really torn about is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I really enjoy the Shadow and Bone universe that I've seen in the TV show, and I thought by reading Six of Crows I would get a little bit more of that, but I think I've just learned that I genuinely prefer the TV show adaptation versus the characters in the books. I do own Crooked Kingdom, and that's one of the main reasons why I think I will pick it up in the future. But I think since I had tried to read Ninth House and I really disliked it, and I felt Six of Crows to be a little underwhelming, I just might not be the target audience for Leigh Bardugo's writing style. So I'm going to give Crooked Kingdom a shot, but if it doesn't absolutely wow me, I probably will end up unhauling both Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom in the future. On the next tier list we are going to be talking about is Perfectly Acceptable. This is quite a self-explanatory tier. It's very much middle of the road books. There's nothing wrong with them, but I personally didn't get enough out of them for me to hold them close in my heart for the long term. The books on this list are Felix Ever After, They Both Die in the End, Before We Disappear, Ace of Spades, Helm of Midnight, Rosewater, The Lucky List, The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea, A Thousand Ships, and In the House in the Dark of the Woods. I would say for the majority of the books on this list, I definitely would read other books by these same authors in the future. The one I am most actively going to go out and read from again is Helm of Midnight, being from Marina Losteller. This is the start of an adult fantasy series, and I did enjoy a lot of aspects of the world building, so I will be picking up the sequel. The next tier list is a very personal one, and that is My Little Meow Meows. These are books that might be objectively bad, but I love them, so they get their own special tier. The books on this list are Gentleman's Guide to Getting Lucky, The Nobleman's Guide to Scandal and Shipwrecks, Mist, The Book of Atreus, Lake's Edge, A Dark and Hollow Star, The Silence of the Girls, The Scum Villain Self-Saving System, The Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, The Queer Principles of Kit Webb, Prince Lestat, and Rock, Paper, Scissors. There's only one book on this list that kind of awkwardly is sitting here amongst the others, and that is The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. This is not a bad book by any means. It's very, very well written, and I really enjoyed pretty much every aspect of the story. The only reason it's here is that it's not really one that I would recommend to people in good faith, and it's not a book that I necessarily would read again in the future. It definitely was like a one and done type of deal, because the book deals with a lot of really, really heavy topics, so I just don't feel like it has a place in some of the other tiers on this list. But it is really good, and it is like one of my favorite books that I read this last year. So I feel like this is just a very like hesitant recommendation of the video to definitely check out all of the trigger warnings before you decide to pick it up. The next tier on the list is It's a Crime I Don't Talk About These More. And these are basically books that I think are so good and I want people to read them. If you're going to be taking any recommendations from this list, these are the ones I would definitely start with because I think they have a very universal appeal. And those books are Portrait of a Thief, If We Were Villains, Piranesi, Ariadne, Circe, Horrid, The Wilder Girls, and Vespertine. The reason I decided to create this tier is basically to put Portrait of a Thief in like the spotlight. It's a book I really, really enjoyed, and I think it has a lot of like universal appeal that even for someone that isn't very interested in reading, they could definitely pick this up and have a good time with it. I feel like if I had done like a book recommendations gift guide video, this is probably one I would definitely highlight in that category. The second highest tier on my list is This Was My Heartstopper, and this basically means all of the queer lit that I really loved and want people to consume. The title of this tier is a little bit of a misnomer. These are not books that are necessarily similar to Heartstopper. It's based on a meme that came out earlier this year, kind of just showing other forms of queer media that were very like influential to people. These are books that I enjoyed both on like a story level as well as their representation of aspects of queer life. And the books on this list are Cemetery Boys, Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, The City Beautiful, What If It's Us, A Marvelous Light, Darius the Great Deserves Better, A Cruel and Fated Light, Interview with a Vampire, Her Body and Other Parties, and Our Wives Under the Sea. I read a lot of queer YA this year. A lot of it came from a desire to kind of like do a full search of all of the queer YA books that were available through my library. And I have quite a few separate videos talking about those books in case you are interested in getting a more in-depth look at any of them. And the last category that we are going to be talking about is my highest tier, and that is The Keepers. A lot of these books are ones I gave 5 stars, but basically these are just the ones that I really, really enjoyed. They are going to be the ones that I'm keeping as my long-term faves going forward in the future. These are all the books I highlighted in my Faves of 2022 video, and those are House of Hollow, Darius the Great Is Not Okay, The Song of Achilles, Clara and the Sun, A Porson, The Secret History, and Belladonna. I've already went out and gushed my feelings for all of these books in that other video if you are interested. But if I had to narrow it down to a top 3 favorite books that I read this year, those would definitely be The Song of Achilles, The Secret History, and A Porson. I like them all for very different reasons, but all ones that are very close to my heart. So that is a full list of all of the books that I read in 2022. Here is a full look at my tier list right now. I also wanted to quickly go over some of the stats that I had from this last year. So like I said, in total I read 73 books this year. There's actually technically 2 more that I'm finishing the last week of December, but I'm planning on counting them as my first books for 2023, just because I can't finish them in time for this video to come out. My average rating for books over the entire year is a 3.8. I also did a little bit of math, and the books that I rated 5 stars, 4.5, and 4 stars were 45 books, which is 61% of the books I read this year, which I think is pretty good. I actually feel like there's a lot of books that I really enjoyed this year, even though there were quite a few ones that I really did not like. So it's good to see just like overall that my percentage is skewing more that I am reading books that I'm enjoying versus ones that I'm not. And I honestly feel that the top books that I really, really loved this year, I am like so happy that even if I had to like slog through a couple books that I didn't enjoy, the fact that I managed to get those ones is like really worth it to me. Even if it is only like 10% of the books that I read end up being like my all-time favorites, I think that like is still a pretty good average. I think if there's anything I have learned from about myself from this last year, it's that I really like can't judge a book by its cover. And by that I mean I end up not really liking the books that I really hype up in my head as much as ones that just kind of come out of nowhere. But I find that just reading the summary and reacting to that is not really a good like barometer for me actually enjoying the book. A lot of my favorite books just in general have been ones that have kind of come out of nowhere. And I kind of want to have a little bit more of that like sporadic energy in choosing my books in the next year. Both in like not letting my perception of the book like hype it up for me in my head, as well as not letting people's opinions on BookTube kind of like sway me in one direction or the other if I should pick up a book or not. I also wanted to talk about the main genres that I read from this last year. I'd say my genres are pretty evenly split. The largest section is 30% being historical. I feel like the historical category is a very large breadth of time, because obviously I'm reading like Greek mythology retellings, which are like thousands of years old, but I'm also reading books that are set in like the Victorian era. I also put all of my Danmei books in this category, since it is kind of like a alternate history historical version of China. The next highest category is fantasy, which is a little bit surprising to me. I think I might have said this in my mid-year tag, but I don't really feel like I read a lot of traditional high fantasy. I think my preferred version of fantasy is usually like our world, but then there's like a magical element added into it. I would say the closest to high fantasy I've had in a book that I really love is A Horsen, but even in there, the universe they're set in is not like a like medieval high fantasy world. It's more like a early Victorian era type of world that has magic added into it. Of these subgenres that I set for myself, the largest category with 32 books is LGBT. It was definitely a main goal of mine to read a majority of queer books. I definitely think I hit that. I'll definitely continue to further this goal in the next year as well. In terms of where I got my books, it's pretty evenly split between getting them as audiobooks through my library or reading them from my library. And then there's a slice of 23% that are books that I own. This section is definitely one I really want to work on in the next year. Obviously, for audiobooks, the only way I usually get them is through my library. I don't have a subscription service to any of the many platforms you can get audiobooks from, but I definitely want to use my library a little bit less in terms of getting physical books, because I own a lot of physical books that I have not read, and a lot of them I really do want to read. So I want to not like only think that I have to use my library to get a new book. I want to kind of like shop my stash, I guess, in a way, and look through the books on my own shelves first. So that is a look at my reading year from 2022. I would love to know in the comment section down below, what was your favorite book that you read this year? What was your least favorite book that you read this last year? I'd love to know if you have any specific reading goals for next year. I mentioned a couple of mine here. I'm still working out some other things I think I want to do to improve my reading in the future. Thinking about my overall reading, I really feel like hitting around like 75 books a year is pretty much like my max capacity, just looking at my current schedule, like when I have the most time for me to read. So I think I'm going to continue to aim to have around 75 books a year. But that being said, I'm really happy with my statistics and everything that I read this last year. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please consider liking this video or subscribing if you aren't already. I hope you've been having a wonderful holiday season and continue to have a wonderful New Year's. And I will be seeing you all in the next video. Bye!